here on JoyNews on Multi TV. Remember, we're also live on Facebook on our social media handles. You can watch us live as well. Let's do some other stories now. And former Finance Minister Seth Tekper has today put up a spirited defense of decisions taken under his tenure, reacting to critics within his government who attributes the defeat of the party to some of his rigid policies as Finance Minister. Mr. Tekper says every decision taken was well thought through and approved before implementation. Hence, he cannot be blamed for the NDC's defeat in the 2016 elections. He's been speaking exclusively to me on these and many other issues.
When we issued our first sovereign bond, that bond we would have had to redeem it next month, 10 years. Okay. It was a 10-year bond, 2007, October. By 2014 actually, we realized that we were 3 years away from redeeming the bond. And we couldn't, in all probability today, if you ask, the government to raise $750 million to redeem that bond, there's no way.
There's no way?
Can you imagine borrowing $750 million in the capital markets, now with the debt levels, with the condition that is confronting the economy? We are not yet out of FPS or tariff bearing. We are not out of commodity crisis. We are not. So you have to plan forward. So we took advantage of the oil price increases at the time, and through the Petroleum Revenue Management Act, established a sinking fund. What does sinking fund say? Sinking fund is establishing a fund, right, to extinguish some debt. And there were two things that were happening. When you take treasury bills, you take our domestic bonds, 3, 5 years, now 10 years, you take our sovereign bonds. The policy we had was we pay interest only. We don't pay down principal. We pay only interest. So if it's a 90-day treasury bill, within 90 days, you have to refinance the principal instead of paying it down. And it was mounting because you were adding principal to principal. So you can imagine the number of loans or bills that we are taking, from treasury bill to domestic bonds to sovereign bonds, and we're just paying interest, not paying down principal. We had to do something about it because it's unsustainable. And so we said, let's put some of the oil revenue aside. It was misunderstood. People said, yeah, we need to current consumption. Why do you want to save money for the future, including the heritage? We said, no, we need to start paying down these debts. The practical example I'm giving is that together with the refinancing that we did, using another World Bank guarantee, today we are left with barely, I believe, 115 million out of the 750 million to redeem. That 115 million, unless it's depleted, was fully provided for by the time we were leaving office in 2016. What it means is that you can walk confidently to the markets and say, I'm redeeming the balance. But how did we take off, the 750 minus, 115? It was one through the refinancing, which extended, we refinance. By refinance, when we say we refinance, it means that you go to the market and we buy back our own using new money, right? And then pushing the loan, in this case, we push it another 10, 15 years. But to avoid waiting for another 10 years, just like this 10 years has come to meet us, and adding on the other bonds, we are saying, let us establish a sinking fund so that we'll be paying down the principal.
But there are those who say that some of these decisions that you took, if you had properly communicated it, we would have understood it. But it looks like some of them were shrouded in some kind of, should I say, for want of a better word, secrecy.
MFA, I don't think it's a fair thing to say. Every single important measure that we took with approval of my bosses, 1, went to cabinet. 2, we went to parliament, sometimes legislation. And 3, you would agree with me that I probably did more media briefs.
You did?
Well, of course. I did, I was doing media briefs almost every month. And espousing many of these things. I must consider many of these things, are, new to our economic management. Thankfully, I had some exposure, saw what is going on in Eastern Europe, becoming part of EU and working in other countries, Exim Bank and other initiatives. And so I felt that I should convince cabinet, and cabinet approved. We went to parliament with many of these things. We passed laws. Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund was debated in parliament. So there's nothing secret about it.
In the process of introducing some of these new policies, with your experience and knowing that it is new to our environment, even you incur the wrath of some of your party members, that you introduce some austere measures that even led to the defeat of your party. I'm sure some of these issues were raised. You've heard about some of them.
Well, I think we should distinguish the austere measures, which arose from the misalignments. You can't perpetually be pretending to be giving out subsidies where you are not paying.
Exactly.
You can't, we couldn't have kept single spine at 70%, including arrears, about 60% excluding arrears, without doing something about it. We couldn't have, I couldn't have pretended that crude oil prices were still $99
when it was not.
When it has slumped, because that's what the law required that the price the law required that we use. But the price has slumped to nearly $40 dollars. So why do you give the impression to Ghanaians, to ministers and others, that the money would come when it's not going to come? So you had to take some difficult measures. And I must say that I think the notion that somehow, my colleagues, were against me, obviously, you had to convince them. And there must be debates, and there was intense debate, either in cabinet, in other places. And I think it is within their right, to ask, questions. Sometimes some of these things came across, as if to say that, they were in opposition to every policy that we implemented. I would say no. It doesn't mean that every single one of them supported every single policy. It doesn't mean that there weren't alternative views as to what should be done. But I think it is within the right of a minister, mind you, within the right of an MP on our side, who would be facing the constituents, to ask questions and understand the policies. In any event, I think that structural reforms and true structural reforms are often difficult. But I must say confidently that the fact that many of these have not been cancelled, as was promised in many instances, probably attests to the fact that these are probably sound policies which the nation needs to nurture. Sinking fund is actually part of the new debt management, what we call the smart borrowing. And let me give you another example of smart borrowing. I gave you an example of a sinking fund, borrowing and paying principal. Let me reduce it. It's like, you go and borrow from the bank, MFR, to buy a car, to put up a house, to pay school fees. And then you go to the bank and you say, I'm really hard up, so let me be paying interest. I hope I will get money someday to pay the principal. So the bank keeps, and then you have another problem, you go and you borrow, and you say, oh, like the first time, it will get to a time when even the bank will stop you. Because you are borrowing, you are not paying down, the principal. So that's what sinking fund forever. Another example in our arsenal of debt management, was a practice where government gave a guarantee for a loan to a state-owned enterprise to establish a commercial project. And we all pay for that commercial project. When we visit the airports, we pay airport tax, through when we go to the port, we pay. And then instead of the project, which is commercial, paying for the loan, right, government takes over. Why? Because an SOE has fallen because of HIPIC mainly, when we had, borrowing space, not paying down the debt. You have to put your foot down and make all those projects self-financing. It's not new. It's not new. I keep saying, Akosomo Dam paid for itself. Original Tema Harbour paid for itself. you know, through fees that were collected. So why did we fall into the bad habit of borrowing to do commercial projects, and then we ask the taxpayer to pay? And then there is an SOE, there is a commercial, you know, management and others who are not paying down the debt. I am not blaming SOEs because remember I already said that part of the problem of the SOEs was government itself was not paying down, well, not paying them the subsidy. But that is not the entire story. So we had to change. We had to make sure the only justifiable debt which the taxpayer should pay is when you have taken a, you know, a loan, for example, for a primary school, right? We all want primary school education. There's no disagreement on that. So why collect fees, for example, just because you have gone to borrow to pay? That one we must pay through our taxes. And that is the reason why state-owned enterprises, and mark the word, enterprises, are the only arm of government that are set up to make profits.
And their CEOs are paid so much. I'm sure you've heard the proposal that was made by the finance minister some weeks or just a week or so ago.
I express a view on that. I think we should also be cautious. I think that yes, I think
for one CEO taking about 75,000 Ghana cedis, we should be cautious in wanting to reduce it.
I mean globally. Let's go to global practice. I'm not saying we should pay CEOs excessively. You are in the private sector, and you'll agree with me that even in advanced countries, the bonuses that are paid to, you know, chief executives of banks and the rest has become an issue, where they take a lot, you know, of pay, and sometimes even their other workers, you know, who are toiling are not paid, you know, well, where they take so much and they don't render good services. So I think performance, I am not arguing at all that SOEs should not perform. Let us hold them. But remember what I said, SOEs are established for the commercial sector of the economy, and they are competing with private sector. So if you take VRA, for example, VRA has a thermal plant. And I don't want to be quite specific. You have Sonon Asogli, you have, you know, others who also have, you know, the same thermal plants. Right? Are you going to be paying your CEO so low that they all move, you know, to competitors?
I'm sure that's a discussion for another day. I'm sure it will be extensive on that for another day. We don't get you often, but when we get you, there are a number of issues that we need to talk about. But there are a lot of questions that we would have to deal with, but so little time. But we'll try and rush through some of them.
Some but let's wrap up. You know, that's the point in which I am saying that globally, CEOs tend to earn more than, you know, especially of the prime ones. But let me end with another thought. If you reduce, you are looking at just a CEO, but the deputies maybe are not political appointees. So do you need a chief accountant for Cocoa Board? If you reduce the CEO, are you going to reduce the salary, you know, for the chartered accountant, for the lawyer, you know, for maybe a good PR person, like, you know, if you need a media, you know, person, and you want to attract, are you going to be reducing it down? Are you sure that that commercial? So I think that is the extent to which I'm saying that let's hold them to perform. And if they perform and they are paid well, so be it, right? Within reasonable, but we should also not expect them, you know, to be paid so low that we also lose the opportunity of getting the right people to run the organization. Okay, so we'll talk about the annual budget funding amount, for instance. There were some decisions that you took that we're hoping that we could help interrogate. With the allocation of our oil money, for instance, for the year 2016, I would say, I have some statistics that we can look at. Under your tenure, you allocated much more money of the oil money to capacity building. Some have questioned it and wondering whose capacity we built. For 2016, for instance, we had 83 million Ghana cedis to capacity building, whereas Agric, which is supposed to be the backbone of our economy, you allocated 27.6 million. Some have questioned it as not to a prudent decision that you took under your tenure. Whose capacity were we building in the first place, and where are they? MFA, I think, yes, I was Minister for Finance in charge of resources. But we shouldn't, you know, also personalize many of these things. We have a Petroleum Revenue Management Act it is one of the strictest, laws you can ever have. You are required, Parliament is required to select 4 sectors, right? 4 sectors and areas where for the next 3 years, that's where you are going to spend the ABFE. So capacity building is one. Agric is another. I think roads and energy, obviously.
Yeah.
So these were the sectors that were approved, for my period as a deputy, and also as, the budget allocation is approved by Parliament.
Yeah.
And when you do the allocation, I think it is also, runs across. I think we should be careful also in just taking capacity building as a headline, because capacity building cut across various sectors of the economy, right? It could have benefited agriculture itself. It could be, I know most of it went into energy as a new area, for the economy.
Yeah.
So you have to train, the people. You have to, we're doing local content, and you needed to have, those people. So I think let us go to let's not just the headline, but look at the breakdown, right? And interrogate the essence of what was done.
Okay.
And then probably when you go to the sectors which did allocation, you may be able, to ask them, what is it that justifies that we should train this person? What is it that justifies that we should hold this seminar, we should do? So it is about, capacity building. I'm saying it is not an individual decision.
It's not.
It's a collective decision that was taken. If, we see the balance, if we see the balance as tilted too much towards capacity building, we have the opportunity every year.
But do we know whose capacity we've been building? And the question is, why?
I don't have the report, but I'm saying that it is like doing the budget, right? So the budget process begins with, and I think that journalists and media people can help sometimes your producers by going to the details, because the capacity building will be in the estimates for the ministries.
Okay.
And the ministries would have accounted for how they use it. And so I think that the answers that you are requiring did a little more research work. If I knew it was going to come up, I would probably have
definitely
done
we would get into it another time, definitely, when we have the privilege of having you. But one other issue that we will be coming to the IMF is also another important area, but fiscal discipline. You touted it that you were going to achieve fiscal discipline, especially in an election year. It turns out that that is not really what happened. I can give you some statistics in being able to achieve that fiscal discipline. We know about our GDP also. For last year, for instance, we had up to 9.3 of the GDP, and then also 10.3 on commitment basis. Would you say that is an achievement?
Look, you do your plans, right, as minister, as cabinet, as a government, right? You suffer setbacks.
You do? So,
let's not forget, for nearly 6 months, we had the Jubilee FPSO turret bearing issue. I don't think anybody would deny it, right? There was no production of crude. We were just talking about ABF, right? We were just talking about sinking fund and other things. There was no production of crude, as a result of which there was no exports. So the city, a source of forex, had to suffer. Revenues, the tax revenues that go into the petroleum holding funds.
Are we not just making excuses for not being able to achieve a target that you had promised?
No, I'm not making excuses. Because remember, in an election year, I went to Parliament to revise the budget downwards. I think we shouldn't forget. And so there is nothing that says that when you set a target and developments are not going the way it should, you should hold to the targets. We went to Parliament to revise the budget, downwards in an election year. And in 2015, when crude oil prices were falling, right? And I think we should I think the political rhetoric has come to a point where we blame everything on non-performance. I am not going to blame the current Minister for Finance and Agric for not increasing cocoa prices. Remember, we also had to hold it, I believe, in 2014 or 2015. They are not in control of, cocoa prices. Are you going to blame them? I'm saying that there are external, I think, but there's a point at which you have to be a bit balanced. And I know that the rhetoric makes everything look like you didn't perform, you did not. But I think as a nation, we should also be bold enough to discuss problems that confront, the economy. And I'm giving you, some of the reasons, the key reason why the revenues did not come in, right? There were overruns, but we also dispute, some of the, the figures, which, for example, the 7 billion, which led to the, I think the minority explained it, right? And I have explained it. It was part of our shift to accrual accounting, right? We had met the criteria for defining arrears. We took the first step, to say, apart from those arrears, ministries are still awarding contracts. What is it that they have in the pipeline? So we brought that pipeline together and we said, let us put it into the GIFMIS, accounts payable, so that we start monitoring those. Somebody takes it and says that Seth Tekper had hidden 7 billion. Let me throw one challenge. When we read the next budget, let us be bold and tell the nation how much. And I hope that you ask that question. Let's be bold and ask that question. What is the equivalent of Seth Tekper's 7 billion which the ministries, departments, and agencies are holding? Are we going to shift back to the old basis and pretend that they don't exist? Right? If you put it out today, I'm saying, I'm throwing a challenge. Let us tell the nation what is the equivalent of Seth Tekper's 7 billion which he was bringing into the GIFMIS so that we can control.
The next budget reading is just days away, so I'm sure that we'll get to be able to raise those issues. But let's quickly deal with the IMF issue. Government's extension of the IMF, of course, it puts a smile on your face, and I'm happy that you get that smile. The extension, for instance, has been attributed to your inability to meet the set targets. That's how come they've had to extend.
Well, we are back to targets again, and I think I've already explained. MFR,
but quickly, what do you make of the decision?
Sorry, what do you make of the decision to extend? If I am going to Parliament to tell Parliament we cannot meet these targets, and it's difficult, right? And somebody wasn't listening, and he kept saying I can perform better, right? Why come and say that, Seth Tekper set unrealistic targets and did not meet them? I went to Parliament, to explain. I went to Parliament to explain that we had issues with the tariff bearing. I went to Parliament to say that the $56 per barrel, which we set for the budget, we couldn't meet it, and we revised it down to, so if there was anything magic in, in performance and not looking at the problems, why blame, Seth Tekper? Why blame Seth Tekper? Right? The promises were made about better performance, better ability to perform in spite of, the problems that we are facing. As far as I know, we may yet meet the revenue targets at the end of this year. The problems have not gone away. But what we know is that up to the third quarter, we are not meeting the revenue targets.
What could account for that?
Of course, as I said, we are just getting out of the issues with the tariff bearing. Crude oil prices are still, not as high, and I don't think that whatever was estimated.
Would you prefer that the current administration comes clean and tell Ghanaians as it is? Would you prefer that?
The current administration is accountable to the Ghanaian people. And let me just put it, that way. I don't think
they're implementing free SHS without meeting targets. We've talked about them not being able to meet some revenue targets. Yet, free SHS has been introduced. Is it sustainable? Are we able to implement it as it ought to be?
Well, I think the issue,
from where you stand.
I think the issue is fiscal sustainability, and I think we've spoken even in this interview about programs which were not fiscally sustainable. We've spoken about subsidies, not sustainable. We've spoken about single spine, not sustainable. We've spoken about revenue targets which may not be sustainable because your crude oil prices are not. So again, look, I think everybody would wish that those who are not fortunate, through the means to go to school, would also go to school. So I don't think there's any dispute, and I think that the NDC had its own progressive, which is born in reality that you may not have all the resources. So again, we leave it. I'm only saying that I only hope that it will be fiscally, sustainable. It is an enormous, burden.
You're hoping, from where you stand, do you think it will be fiscally sustainable?
I do not control the numbers, MFA. It's only the Minister of Finance who controls the numbers. And he's the one who goes to cabinet. So let me give him the benefit of the doubt.